גם אני רוצה לחזור לישון, גם אני מהססת. אל תגידי לי זה לא הזמן, בואי נצא למרפסת. קדושה או לא קדושה, הפרה הזאת גוססת. אל תגידי לי יום יבוא, הביא את היום, אני רוצה לנשק אותה ולהריע לשלום. מתחתנו תנועה עצבנית, הרצפה הישנה קורסת, מה יש לנו להפסיד? בואי למרפסת. הכנפים דוהרים לאט, הנה כבר הם אצלנו. תראי זו אש ידידותית, אש של כוחותינו. גם אני רוצה לחזור לישון, גם אני מפחדת, אבל תראי כמה שאת יפה כשאת מתנגדת. אל תגידי לי יום יבוא, הביא את היום, אני רוצה לנשק אותך ולהריע לשלום. מתחתנו תנועה עצבנית.
Everyone, thanks so much for joining us. I'm Rabbi Lev Meirowitz-Nelson, Director of Emor, the Institute for Bold Jewish Thought. I'm delighted to welcome you to today's program, Meet Smol Emuni, Israel's Faithful Left. We're excited to be streaming on Facebook Live today. Emor, a project of Trua, is a thought leadership institute where we use Jewish sources new and old to invigorate our commitment to human rights and propel us to action. Emor is committed to bringing together people from all corners of the Jewish community to ask big questions, study Jewish texts, and hold courageous conversations about today's most important moral and political issues. As we get things started here today, I invite you to share in the chat where you're joining us from physically and one association you have with the word faith, or in Hebrew, emunah. Today's webinar builds on the series we held over the winter about how democracy, nationalism, and human rights fit together in the Jewish state in the 21st century, the threefold cord, as we called them. Those recordings are available on our website, emorinstitute.org, on the Israel and Occupied Palestinian Territories page. Today's program is the launch of another three-part series, exploring a uniquely Jewish Israeli answer to the question of the threefold cord. I'm honored to have with us today as our guests and teachers, two leaders of Smol Emuni, this movement from Israel. First of all, Michael Manikin is a longtime friend of Trua. He's the director of the Alliance Fellowship Program, an Arab-Jewish political network in Israel. Before joining the Alliance, Michael served as the director of Molad, a nonpartisan progressive think tank in Jerusalem focused on democratic change in Israel. And before that, he was the executive director of Breaking the Silence. In 2021, Michael published the book Atchalta, Ethics and Tradition in a Time of Power. In Hebrew, the book is set to come out in English later this year. He lives in Jerusalem with his wife and 3 children. And I'm very excited to welcome to our Zoom space for the very first time, Brit Yacobi. She's director of the Religious Freedom and Gender Department at Shatil, which is New Israel Fund's action arm in Israel. Before joining Shatil, she was director of education at Jewish Pluralism Watch of the Israeli Masorti movement, and also founded Free Space, a project that runs Jewish cultural events in abandoned synagogues in Tel Aviv. She has a BA in Talmud and a master's in Jewish and gender studies. We're going to run this interview style. So I'll start off with some questions for Brit and Michael, and then we'll take questions from all of you via the chat box. I'll apologize in advance if we don't get to everybody's question. Sometimes we have many more than we have time for, in which case I have the hard job of deciding which ones to ask. So, Michael, Brit, so good to have you here. Start us off, just tell us what Smol Emuni is.
Michael. First of all, hi, everybody. This is really fun for us. And thanks for arranging it. There are two answers to, I think, to what the faithful left is. There's a sociological answer, and that we give, and there's one which is more content focused. But I will say that name came about by accident, or semi-accident 2.5 months ago. when the elections results came in, for those of us living in religious communities of various types, activists on issues that are related to equality, we were very nervous about our own communities, meaning there's a question about Israel in general, but there's also a question of what does it mean to be in a religious Zionist community when your political leadership is represented by people like Ben-Gvir and Smotrich. What does it mean to be part of an ultra-Orthodox community when your leadership is represented by the ultra-Orthodox parties right now? What does it mean to be in a Masorti, Mizrahi background, which we might talk about later, where a lot of your representation is Likud? How do you deal with your own communities? It's not a new question, but we felt the question is more acute, and we decided to hold a conference for people such as ourselves to not feel alone. That was sort of the plan of 6 or 7 activists that joined together. One of our friends, ultra-Orthodox feminist activist Michal Chernovitsky, said the goal is to reach 300. A couple of weeks down the road, when we started the conference, over 700 people showed up. Ultra-Orthodox, Orthodox, Masorti, and it was very exciting. And from that point on, we called ourselves Faithful Left. Now, the term Faithful Left was really thought of by the person who designed our poster, who also happens to be just another incredible ultra-Orthodox activist named Esti Shushan. She runs the organization Nivcharot, which is an organization pushing ultra-Orthodox women into political positions. She looked at our poster with all the content on it, and she said, Smol Emuni, that's what it is. And when we asked her why she picked those terms, she said, first of all, she thinks it's very important that we self-identify as left, that we shouldn't beat around the bush. We should say who we are. And the word emuni, which is not usually a word which is used in Israel on these issues, and definitely not on the left, is a way to create a home for different communities. When we say religious in this country or dati, it usually, for a lot of reasons, discounts people who are ultra-Orthodox or Haredi. If you say shomer mitzvot, it could push out of the conversation people who are Masorti. So the idea of emuni, or putting faith in the middle, are people who are informed, and their politics and their ethics are informed by our faith. And there are various different communities of that, and that is what the Smol Emuni is from our perspective.
Maybe I'll add that first, I'm really excited to be here, so maybe you will hear it in my English. But the right camp called themselves the faithful camp, המחנה האמוני. So this is also a reclaiming for both of the words. First, for the word small left, which in Israel people really forgot that it's just an ideology statement and not just something bad. And the second is to reclaim the word emuni, faithful, to say not only the right camp keeping the Judaism in Israel, we also have a position here, and we also see it. And when we keep the democracy or equality or fighting the occupation, it also came from a faithful identity.
Great. I love a happy accident, and I love the power of a graphic designer. Tell us, if you can take us back in time a little bit and fill in some of the backstory. Right, this is not a webinar about the history of Israel's current political crisis, but it's kind of hard to do one without the other. So can you fill us in a little bit on what brought us to this place and how Smol Emuni came about?
Okay, so I remember the phone call that Michael called me day after the election. And in this time, we didn't understand how bad it's going to be, and we didn't understand all the reform, but we understand it's going to be the most extreme right government in the history of Israel, nationalistic government, and also it's going to be the most religious government in the history of Israel. And Michael said, we need to do something for people just like us. And okay, everything that Michael said, I'm saying yes. So this was the start, but we felt that first we felt that we need to strengthen the voice against things that coming from our communities, like not in our name. So it started from there, but also to be a place, to be a home for people, for the minority people in Israel who are left and religious. We are minority, but also like I know that Ben Gvir and Smotrich are minorities in Israel, but they don't feel like minorities. They feel like they are majority, or they trying to influence the majority in Israel. So we are a minority, but we need to we want to be also a home for people just like us. So it started day after the election, and 2 months after it, it was huge conference in Echal Shlomo, which is also a really important religious place in Jerusalem. It was the first place of the rabbinical court in Israel, and the place of the Mizrahi for all the years, the religious Zionist organization. 700 people, so maybe we're not so minority as we think, from all over Israel, periphery, center, Jerusalem, young and adults, Haredi, Mizrahi.
Maybe I would just add that the story of the right and religion in Israel is a story which is unfortunately well known, and I think relatively well documented. And the fact that things are moving to a more extreme direction, I think is true in Israel, but probably true in the US and in places worldwide, both in Jewish communities and others. And we're aware that we're in an example. And I think it's always important to remember that we're always that these issues are always examples of much larger ones in the country itself. But I will say that in last years, there has been sort of a resurgence in various different areas of activist groups who come from faith-based communities on a lot of issues. I think, primarily gender, LGBT, in ultra-Orthodox communities and religious communities, a lot happening on workers' rights, on income inequality. There's a lot of stuff happening on land reform. I belong to, anti-occupation groups, which are coming from faith-based backgrounds. And I think a lot of it for us makes a lot of sense. And I imagine for people who are on calls in Trua understand this very instinctively. So I feel sort of that on this call, at least, I don't need to explain why it fits. But if needed to be, I can do that. But I do think that it may be worth adding that in Israel, one of the challenges that we have 4 completely separate school systems. So we're all already very much sort of placed in a very specific stream. And then we don't necessarily see other communities of faith even within our world. So I have, only started creating political relationships and personal relationships with people coming from ultra-Orthodox background in the last 5 or 6 or 7 years. And it's not communities that I necessarily grew up with. Likewise with Masorti activists and groups, and it's something that we're still learning to do, and we see within it a lot of opportunity and a lot of excitement and a lot of optimism, because it's really a way to have conversations on Torah in an interesting and new way for us. We all come with sort of our rabbinical traditions and our sociological traditions, and it's really interesting for us to sort of share them with each other. It was very important for us in the conference and very important for us in the group in general to be as diverse as we can be, but also to try to be consistent and coherent on every issue. We don't view ourselves as a moderate version. I think a lot of times sort of like the hope is that you'll have like an extreme version of religious people and a moderate version of religious people. Like the moderate, we can get, you hear like people on the center left in Israel saying like, we can get along with the moderates, the normal religious people. We don't want to get along with the radicals, and we don't come from that tradition.
Yeah, we're also not moderate at all.
No, we're not moderate at all, nor do we see it as necessarily a sort of something you need to strive towards. We want to be as clear as we can, and that's talking about Jewish-Arab relations, but also talking about disparities within Jewish communities, between men and women, between Ashkenazim and Mizrahim, between rich and poor, and so on, and that is something which is we feel sort of yet to be developed in full, and we're always redeveloping, and something which we're very happy to be part of.
Great. So I'd actually like to dive in a little bit more to the topic you each just started to broach about the diversity within the group. Can you tell us in a little bit more detail who are the key groups that make up Smol Emuni, and what's new about that coming together, what it might portend for the future?
I can start. I mean, I'm sure there are lots of activists on this call, and activists tend to have 9 or 10 different organizations and groups that they're part of. So it's always funny for us to say, well, there's this group and that group, but we happen to be in all of them. But I would point at sort of very at directions which are relevant. I mentioned the sort of ultra-Orthodox feminist groups, which I think play a very important role in what we do. So people like Esti Shushan, who I mentioned, or Michal Chernovitsky, or Penina Pfeiffer, people who have been fighting for a voice in their community for the last decade or so, very, very effectively, both in terms of political representation, but also in terms of rights of women in workplaces, in home space, and who are some of the most inspiring activists I know in the country. There are people who come from an anti-occupation background, which is more sort of the world that I come from. So I ran Breaking the Silence and Molad and other organizations, but I'm also active in a group called Children of Abraham, which operate in Hebron in solidarity with Palestinians against the occupation. There was maybe unfortunately there was if you remember the beginning of this government, there was a activist who got hit by a soldier, which made sort of waves worldwide. So that was our group, and there are people who come from church and state, which church and state issues, which Brit can probably say more about, which is the world that she comes from, trying to create a different relationship between church and state and freedom of religion, and so on. So there are people who come from those worlds. I'll say in the conference we had, and it's on YouTube, definitely for those who speak Hebrew. We had, I think, 7 speakers who gave keynotes in the plenary, and the first keynote, which was a really big deal for us, was Adina Bar Shalom, Rabbanit Adina Bar Shalom, who's a very important feminist Mizrahi leader on her own right, and also the daughter of Rav Ovadia Yosef, is one of the most important sort of religious and political religious leaders, I think, in the 20th century. And our role is to create a space and a home for her as well, and we're happy to call ourselves, her students and part of her generation. But she spoke, and then a rabbi named Bezalel Cohen spoke, who comes from the ultra-Orthodox world, and Malki Rotner, who comes from a Hasidic Belz community, and Avi Mutada, who comes from a Masorti community. So people who come from various different walks of life. And I think, again, what connects us all, which is a really a deep commitment to our tradition, which I'd like to think is a tradition of empathy, and a tradition of really a desire to be, good human beings and good Jews, and also sort of, I think, a real importance to present religious life as something which is worthwhile. And I think so many people in Israel now, it's sad to say, for really good reasons, when they imagine religious people, they imagine force. They imagine force, they imagine violence, they imagine aggression, and it's something which we feel that part of what Kiddush Hashem is to present what we feel as sort of the more beautiful parts of our tradition.
Yeah, Michael, I shared our YouTube, so you can see it, but it's all in Hebrew. I can say Michael said about the rabbis that come to speak, and Rabbi Adina Bar Shalom, she's one of my leader in life, but he didn't tell that a week or 2 weeks before. I'll call like 10 or more rabbis that see themselves as left, and they really afraid to come before, because you can imagine that for rabbis in Israel it's really hard to connect with left ideas. So it's also like everyone that came is super brave. But I think the conference, it's the first time that Haredi, ultra-Orthodox, Masorti Mizrahi, and religious Zionist people see themselves as one camp, because we're really different from each other. And everyone has his black, like for religious Zionist people, when Rabbi Lea Shakdiel spoke and said the word apartheid, it was like crazy. And for Haredi to be in a conference which spoke about LGBT, it's super hard. And for others to hear about like social justice and equality between Mizrahi and Ashkenazi, it's hard. So I think all of the people in the conference feel a bit like they have a place, but they need to, but maybe they don't feel great in this place, but we are, and about ourselves, we are like few activists. We all know each other from our activism. Michael coming from his background, I'm really in the gender area and the religious freedom area. I can say that I myself coming from a Mizrahi Masorti family, but I grew up in the religious Zionist community, Bnei Akiva, Ulpana, and etc. But I never saw myself like in the core of the religious community. My family is because we are Masorti Mizrahi, but I myself coming from really ideology family. I was the head movement of the Likud party, the youth movement of the Likud party. So I grew up in different ideology, but in really ideology place. And I feel like most of the activists that connect the Smol Emuni have this gap between the place they grew up to the place they are, maybe between their home to their activism, maybe between like the conflict between themselves. So this this also something that connect us.
Curious actually about Rabbis for Human Rights, which is the organization that Shura grew out of more than 20 years ago. Are they attached to this Smol Emuni as well, or are they a different part of the left?
Yeah, no, I mean, we're all, again, I think one of the positive things that are happening in general in sort of last years is much less sort of an attempt for people to differentiate each other. Avi Dabush, who runs Rabbis for Human Rights, was actually supposed to be, I think he ended up being sick the same day, but he's a very, very close ally and partner. We now give, we learn together since the conference. I think Torah always, and learning always needs to be center of political action of faith-based people, and it was very important for us as the next step of what we do has to be going back into the synagogue and learning. So a lot of the core activists and more who are joining, we're learning together Reshit Chochma, which is a Musar book from the 16th century from Tzfat and from Hebron, and and I'm mentioning it because Rabbi Eric Asherman comes every week to learn, and these are people who are heroes for us. And I think a lot of our role is also to tell our surroundings and our fellow activists and our our children and whoever wants to hear that we're not the first one doing this, and we come from a tradition or from traditions which are very, very committed to questions of to equality, are very, very committed to skepticism of violence in general, skepticism of war specifically. And there are people who wrote and created and who write and create, and we're not what, I think that's the first thing that any sort of somebody from a religious community comes from is say, we're not doing anything new. We're just continuing in the footsteps of people who did things before us. So we really don't feel that we're doing anything new in the regard of Torah. Meaning we feel that we're connected to, and we're connecting others to, people who are very significant to us, be it rabbis or poets or activists or a lot of people who inform sort of our ethical tradition, our Jewish ethical tradition and worldview. Yeah.
Great. Anything you want to add there?
No.
Maybe I will say, because you talked about Shua and rabbis for human rights, and I don't think I think also the beautiful thing about this type of work is it transcends sort of the geographic borders. And Rabbi Jill Jacobs, who's, other than being a dear friend, I'm also sort of I've read her books, and I'm sort of very engaged in that kind of work. And when she read the draft of my book, and I think a lot of our conversation, the ability to have a conversation, is the ability to step outside of either our community or step outside of our country and say, whoever this tradition is meaningful and important for him, or whoever understands our language is really part of that conversation.
So I'd love you to situate this for us a little bit more in the context of the Israeli left. I feel like in the US, the question is always asked, where is the Israeli left? What happened to it? Which may or may not be a fair question, but I'm curious how Smol Emuni fits into the kind of bigger picture ecosystem of what's going on in the Israeli left and what's new here. Great, I don't know if you want to start.
Bad things happen to the Israeli left. I don't know what to tell you. Yeah, I don't know. We all see it. We see that. I can say it. I'm coming from the left and I work in NIF. So, but I feel that we, for many time in the left, we didn't spoke with different people than us. I see the youngest people, not only religious, but young people, they all really nationalistic. And they all see Ben-Gvir in TikTok and feel connected to him. And we are, as bad thing happen, we just turn to keep our camp tiny and people that just look like us. And I think this is one thing that happened to the left Israeli. A lot of people that in the core, there are left people, like they really believe in equality and democracy, don't see themselves as left, because a lot of years that they're really, I don't know how to tell it, bad influence of how populism of the right about what it's to be a Smolani left in Israel. But I think I feel really hope these days, because we see a lot of people that don't see themselves as lefties outside in the street demonstrate, and they said equality and peace. And I really believe that equality is something that can be a key for because when you start to believe in equality between men and women, between LGBT to straight people, and most of the Israeli society believe in it, most of the Israeli society, religious and secular. So maybe your eyes will open to other equality issue between Jews and Palestinian people. I don't know. That's the right see it also, and because of that, they're so afraid from equality, because they're so afraid of gender issues. So I believe in these times, I believe it's the time to maybe write a new statement for the left. But a lot of people spoke about what's wrong in where the left is really wrong. This is the must I don't know question. Everyone had something to say about it, so maybe this is my perspective, but I believe the ideology will win one day. I don't know.
So what I hear you saying is this left needs to get onto TikTok more. Michael, what
No,
would you
but
add?
I don't know if TikTok, but I really believe that we need to speak with our young people. Like I'm going to speak with yeshivas, with midrasha, with every high school that want. Many times I'm the only, the first small people, the first lefty people they saw in their life. So, and they started with hating me, and then they said like, you're fine, but all of your friends hate us. And maybe it's changed later.
I think, I mean, other than all, the things that Brie talked about, sort of that I fully sort of agree and feel very much personally about, sort of both the lack of diversity within our communities that we need to work on, be it religious or ethnic or class-based diversity, but also the desire of many people to disengage from the rest of the community is also a challenge. But I want to add on to that I do think I'm definitely coming from sort of an anti-occupation perspective, which is one of the perspectives that we're focused on, is that I think the position of the left in this country is in many ways unnatural. And it's something that we need to, it's not that necessarily that we're doing anything wrong, but the expectation that, it's like the expectation that the 1% will be the leaders of the fight against income inequality. So the expectation that, Israeli Jews will be the majority of Israeli Jews will be against occupation, I think, and I say this again, sadly, is an unrealistic expectation, because we have something which, even though it's wrong for us to have, we feel that it's ours. And the way I think history works, and the way that politics works, and the way that Jewish history works as well, every history is at the end of the day, the people who will end the occupation will be Palestinians who take what I believe personally is theirs. And maybe that doesn't mean that our role isn't crucial and it isn't important, because I think what our role is to provide a alternative framework, is perhaps to provide a political imagination. It is to try to break down sort of the sometimes homogenous view among Israelis, and when moments come where Palestinians are stronger, then our role can be important in both to empower Palestinians and also to empower those voices who say we're willing to let go of what we have. But while I'm very, very critical, as most I think leftists are, while I'm very, very critical of my camp, I'm also sort of aware that it's not that it's not that if we just had the right campaign slogan, or if we just worked a bit better, we would win. And I think that type of political fantasy, I think, is unrealistic. Again, I don't think that's necessarily our role. And to take it back to the faith-based conversation, if I think of the sort of, the people who I'm inspired, the texts that I'm inspired by, both in recent Jewish history, but also in older Jewish history, it's not necessarily the most important voices at the time. If I'm really into Hasidei Ashkenaz, let's say, they weren't necessarily the most important group at the time, but their Torah, I think, is really, really important, and it endured. And I think that the beautiful thing about being part of a tradition is that you create a voice within it, and it's there. And it's very important for me to not only think about the question of why the left is big and why the left is small, is to be the question that sort of moves us ahead, but also, what is our role in terms of what, what we should be doing, and what is our role within our community. Yeah.
Looking to the future, does Smol Emuni aspire to be a political party or to move in different ways?
God, no. No. No.
It's great that we agree, Michael.
We agree on everything. I think there are two areas which interest us. One is, which are really of sort of acute, I think, significance now. The first is sort of the public voice needed to break down this monolithic voice that religion equals aggression. And we think it's really, really important to battle that. The conference was part of that. There could be a whole bunch of things happening there in the near future, which are part of that. And the second role that we find is very important is the role of education. A lot of us have kids in religious education. A lot of us are connected to that world, and the fact that it's and there needs to be space for people to grow up in this country, realizing that there's more than one political way to be religious, and that's, I would say, sort of a much more long-term endeavor, which interests a lot of us within the group. So I'd say it's the public, and that includes rabbinic, which we're very weak on. Our camp, the rabbis seem to be last to join. So that's route one, and route two is education. But we're all very much involved politically, and a lot of us belong to political parties. But no, I don't think you're going to be finding a Smol Emuni party in the near future. It's not in the cards. It's not something that, and plus, I don't think. Yeah, it's there's so many reasons why it's not something that we want to do.
Yeah, but also we don't want to be a civil society organization. We want to be a movement for people and connect with all other amazing organizations that already happened, and maybe help them to strengthen their voices, but be also a home that for people that don't see themselves part of these organizations. I can say about like the public issue or like the short-term issue that I don't know if you heard about the pogrom that happened 2 weeks ago or maybe 3 weeks ago in Hawara. It was crazy night, and we all wake up day after and ask ourselves what we can do. And then we opened a WhatsApp group for young people in yeshivot, that to help them to speak in their yeshivas about what happened in Hawara. And maybe we want to be also the home for this specific person in the yeshiva, that they're the only left people in a really right, extreme right yeshiva. We have in this WhatsApp group Haredi young people from Hebron, and also young people from the most important yeshivas in the religious Zionist community. So I think about myself, when I was 17 or 18, and I think about maybe this organization that pick me and bring me tools or ideas to do things in my area.
There's, I know the question time I think is going to be later, but there's a question which keeps on coming back, which is how can we help? First of all, I think it's a very moving question, and thank you.
Wow.
we will say, I mean, we didn't plan on being sort of, we didn't plan on this movement thing. We thought this was going to be a once-off conference with a bunch of people, and then we'll move on. And because it generated so much, and it was only 2 months
we
ago,
also,
so
we also thought it's gonna be 300 people. It was
yeah,
more than 700 people. So
right. So we're still trying to wrap our head. You know, there's no organization called Smol Emuni. There's no. It's all very, very new. So I imagine that as as things consolidate, this is also like one of the first lectures that we're actually doing about it. So it's even weird for us, for me, it's for Brita, it looks like as well. It's weird for us to even talk about this as if it's something which is real. So I think in the meantime, what would be important would be less specific and more general, but also really, really important. Like I really do believe that that rabbinic voices on this issue are very, very important. I would add that I think there needs to be much more of a discussion. I think we do we do a lot of progressive conversation really well, but one of the things that we can be better at, I'm saying this, Jews around the world, right? Because we're all doing the same thing. One thing that we need to be doing better, I feel, is doing better work on race and ethnicity. And I come from Orthodox tradition, which has its own challenges, and other people come from other traditions which have different challenges. But I think it's something. But those voices, at the end of the day, we're all helping each other by being part of the same community. So I know that's a relatively vague answer, and I'd like to hope that, like, in the next couple of months, things will be more structured. But for the meantime, one of the reasons which we were happy to do this conversation is because we really feel that this is an extension of the same community that we're part of. So we don't feel this is sort of going outside of our world.
Picking up on the question of race and ethnicity, there's a question that came in about how the experience of the protests in Israel and of Smol Emuni differ based on what a person's ethnic background.
Well,
if you want to speak to that.
Sure. I mean, so first, I mean, so the ethnicity means a lot of things. So I just want to categorize. There's internal Jewish question of ethnicity, primarily the rift between Ashkenazi and Mizrahi individuals and communities, which is actually a really, really big issue right now amongst the protests, definitely in the last 24 hours, with the left being stigmatized for good reasons, for being sort of very elitist and very Ashkenazi. The big slogan now coming from the right is "I'm a second-class citizen," which is kind of ironic if you think about the Palestinians in this country, but still that's very much part of the conversation. So that's one aspect of this, and obviously the second aspect is the Jewish Palestinian question, both within Palestinians in Israel who are citizens of the country and very much not involved in the protest, and Palestinians under military occupation in the West Bank and Gaza. It's really hard, everything in this country is crazy at the moment. Brit and I on Sunday night were hit by water cannons. It was only 3 days ago. It feels like it was a month ago at the protest at the big protest on Sunday night. It was Sunday night, I think. So and since then, a million things have happened. So it's really hard for us. It's sort of hard for me to get a bird's eye view on what's happening. I think the left on ethnicity is pushing to a lot of different directions. A lot of the conversations among the protests now are very much, I would say, disconnected from the reality of a lot of Israelis. That being said, there are a lot of voices within the protests who are really pushing boundaries on, there's a really important new group coming out called the Collective Mizrahi, like a Mizrahi collective, which came out, put out some really interesting papers in recent days. There's a really strong anti-occupation, groups working in all protests. So it's really hard to say where people are being pushed to at the moment. For us in the Smol Emuni, it's really important to again, not necessarily present a voice of moderacy. And it is worth saying there's sort of moderate religious Zionists who are protesting, and it's a voice which is growing. And I'm really happy that that voice is happening. It's just not where we are. And I think it's not where we are personally and temperamentally and politically, but it's also not where we are sort of in terms of our movement-wise, but we recognize that that voice of moderacy is really important.
Sorry, can you be a little more specific about that? What do you mean when you say moderate, and why is that not where you find yourself?
I think there's okay. I think a lot of
I can say something. Okay.
Thanks. Yalla, lechi al ze. What's that?
I think for many years the religious Zionist community see herself as in the middle between the Haredi and the secular people, and she sees herself as bringing like also liberal voices and also like conservative or traditional voices to the and a lot of religious Zionist people see themselves as the between people between the ideas of Israel, and like they have the power to be the bridge between but they don't understand that they are also in some bubble, and they don't bridge between anyone, and we don't want to be a bridge. We want to speak about ideology. I feel that there are a lot of moderate people that their ideology it's to be in conversation, and for us conversation it's super important. I have conversation in my home, like my family demonstrating their big right. It was not so big, but in the big right demonstration that happened 2 days ago, just after the demonstration. So I have this conversation at home. I have it with my friend, but I don't see only the conversation as my goal. I want to speak about ideology. I want to speak about like equality and democracy and peace. And I feel that a lot of I don't know, moderate people fell in love with the feeling that they can speak with Haredi person and with and it's all also just Michael, it's your word, but it's also just from a Jewish perspective. They speak just with themselves, and as you can speak about the future in Israel without Haredi people, that there are 12% from the Israeli society, and I said it in my like camp to the left people. You can't like do nothing without the Haredi community. You can't think about the future of Israel without speaking with Palestinian people. So
I think well, the reason that we're both sort of very I think sort of like are very what would be the word, like strident on this issue is because, first of all, it's literally the last 12 hours has really been a conversation on this idea of unity and the importance of unity and moderacy. And if we just get Netanyahu and Gantz in the same room, then things can be mediated. And then there are people, and the minute there's a conversation about mediating between left and right, there are people who see their role as mediating. And a lot of times those people would self-describe themselves as moderate. But for us, a lot of the conversations about power and about who has power and who doesn't have power. And a lot of times when two people are in the room, we forget that there are a lot of people who are left out. And the two people who are in the room happen to be in this context, both representing very powerful communities in this country. And we feel our role is also to point to the power disparities. I think it's both our role politically, but it's also very much our role religiously. So when we say moderacy, obviously moderacy as a temperament, I think is really healthy. but if it comes at the expense of sort of integrity and having and having a very consistent and coherent position, then I think it could be very, very problematic. And maybe lastly, I would add that a lot of times it's presented, and by the way, this is also sadly accurate in polls, sort of like the more religious you are, the more you would be sort of like right wing. The less religious you are, then you can be more moderate. And I don't feel my religion is, I need to moderate my religion in order to enact my politics. I want to also be radical religiously. I don't want to feel that I'm compromising between those issues, which is why sort of it's very important for us to stress that if, yeah, I mean, we can go on this, both of us, for days, so we'll stop. We'll stop there. Yeah. But I do think it offers, but I do think that presents maybe a different perspective maybe than sort of perhaps our previous generation of activists on this issue.
Yeah, and it's not a popular perspective.
Yeah,
just ours
right now. Yeah.
That's very helpful. Thanks. I'm going to try to fit two more questions in here before our time runs out. One is about kind of a long-term vision for the state of Israel. When the occupation finally ends someday, how do you, either as leaders of Smol Emuni or as individuals, see the state evolving? What does the Jewish state look like post-occupation?
Wow. I mean, aren't Jews more about sort of incrementalism? Like, I don't know. Like I would be happy with. I'm trying to think of how to answer such a big question. On a personal level, and there are different voices even among our own group on this issue, among our very very small group with of activists, is that my very personal view is I prefer to see it as a state of Jewish people and not as a Jewish state. So that's one. Two is that when the occupation will, God willing, end, there will still be a lot of issues that we need to deal with. And it's not like the occupation will end and Mashiach will come. Like, occupation will end and there'll still be people who have and people who don't have. And there'll still be a lot of work to do. And when the occupation will end, there'll still be, over 70 years and probably more where people lived under occupation, and and those things take decades and decades to handle and reconcile. So I think we all have our work cut out for us. I don't, ultimately, like in our times, there's for me at least, I don't want to strive for like a perfect state structure, a perfect Jewish state structure, because I don't think that's possible, nor do I think it's relevant to strive for something like that. I think the ideal is to strive to be somebody who's engaged and who can do something that they're proud of, and and their community is proud of, and their children are proud of, and that Hashem is proud of, and so on and so forth. But I don't think we view things through that lens. I imagine different people in our group have different solutions that they're interested in. I'm for ending the occupation in the two-state framework, and there might be other people who think differently, and that's fine. But I don't strive for a perfect state structure or for a perfect Jewish state structure. Just because it rose, there are people who are more liberal oriented in our group, but I would probably say that from an Israeli perspective, and I imagine this will come up maybe in another conversation, if that happens, is that the Israeli Jewish landscape and Palestinian landscape is has an overwhelmingly strong socialist history, and we feel very happy with presenting ourselves that way, which is why we use the word left very happily. So that's the tradition that we come from, and we realize that that's a minority tradition today in the U.S., but it's very much among the left in Israel. It's very strong. So that was an aside, but I just saw that it came up in the Q&A. Sorry, it's a bit of an ADHD looking at things happening around me as I speak.
Great. What would you add about a vision for the state?
I can't say nothing about when the occupation ends. It's when the Mashiach will come. נבואה ניתנה לשוטים. But I agree that we have a lot of different problems in Israel, and I think most of the Jewish community in Israel doesn't feel that the occupation hurt her. So I don't know, my family have another problems like economical problems, a lot of different problems. We as women in Israel have a lot of problems. We still, I don't know, can't marry or divorce however we want. So we have, like, the occupation is the biggest, but we have a lot of different problems. I don't know about the state, about the connection with the state. What is the question?
What Israel, the Jewish state, might look like when the occupation ends? But if you feel like you can't,
the Jewish state, I don't know. I'm still trying to imagine it in myself. I don't really know, but this morning I said, and there are some people that really, I don't know, they didn't believe me, but I said that without a turning in my life, before I work in NIF, I could live my whole life and never met any Palestinian person. I grew up in Ramat Gan, it's next to Tel Aviv. There are no Arabic community over there. Then I go to the army. After it, I learned Talmud in the university. There are no Palestinians that learn it. And then I can, and my parents and my sister never met any Palestinian people. So I feel that when it will change, a lot of things in Israeli society will change, but I don't know. And it's similar to things that happen with Haredi community and secular people.
Okay, the question I wanted to end with, I think we kind of don't have time for, so I think what I'll do is throw it out as a teaser for hopefully the next webinar, which is really about this work of building a religious left and how those two pieces fit together, what we can learn from you, what we can help you with in building together. That's definitely part of the project Trua sees itself and Emor see themselves as being involved in. If either of you has a quick word you want to say about that, go for it. Otherwise, I'll take us toward wrap up.
I would just say that everything faith-based in our tradition, I think, needs to have a Beit Midrash at the center of it, that we can talk about activism and we can talk about political parties and we can talk about education systems, but at the end of the day, there always needs to be a re-engagement with the Beit Midrash, and there always needs to be a re-engagement with our textual background. So what a religious left looks like at the end of the day, I think the first question always needs to be, what does its Torah look like? And there, I think the wonderful thing is that I really think there's like a ton of interesting and important work to do. And as I said, I don't think that work ends in a specific, a culture in Israel, and nor do I think that work ends at the end of the border of the state of Israel. That work ends, with anybody who's interested in being part of that conversation in a very sort of egalitarian way. So that's the only thing I would say for now on that question.
I'll just say that I inspired by a lot of things that happened in the Jewish community in the state, and I want to learn more because I think your have a long history of what it to be Jewish and progressive, and we don't.
What a nice note to end on. Okay, so I really want to thank the two of you so much, Brit Yacobi and Michael Manikin, for sharing your expertise with us. We really wish you all the best in this project and look forward to having you or your co-organizers back here sometime, probably in May, for part 2 of the series. Those details will go out as soon as we've confirmed them, though probably not till after Pesach, so don't hold your breath.
Yeah.
Great. And
Pesach
thank you so much.
Sameach. Thank you.
Pesach Sameach. And you can find us Facebook, Twitter. I don't know if you want to ask something or be in touch.
Sure. I want to mention 2 other events coming up that people will be interested in. One is the first issue of Fragments, which is Emor's twice-a-year publication, is now available online as a free download from our website. So if you go to emorinstitute.org and click on the conversation header Freedom, you'll find it there. Also, the Trua Gala is coming up on May 10th. Tickets are still available, so you can join us either in person here in New York or virtually. All that information is on the website at trua.org/gala2023. Thanks as well to the Trua and Emor staff who made today's program possible. That includes Shira Danan, Bennett Decker, Rabbi Jill Jacobs, Rabbi Becky J, Rachel Lerner, Sarah Novick, and Hannah Weilbacher. The music you heard at the top of the program was True North by the Shandas. This is the point where I usually wrap up, say thank you and goodbye, and we log off. But today we're trying something a little bit different. We want to invite all the clergy, all the rabbis and cantors on the call who are members of Trua, to stick around for the next half hour for a follow-up conversation with our director